All right, fans, if you know me, you know I love the Miami Dolphins, and I got some exciting news with our next guest, Aaron Salgado. He's got a cool documentary called The Curse of Joe Robbie, and it's playing this weekend at the Coconut Grove Film Festival, January 12th and through the 14th. It's this Saturday afternoon at 12:15. Get your tickets. There's limited seating. I think you're going to love the movie. Definitely check it out, and I hope you enjoy the show. Take care. Go Dolphins. All right, my next guest, I've met him before. He made an awesome fan film called Montana. This guy truly scratches me where I itch because he made a documentary on the Miami Dolphins. Aaron Salgado, welcome to the show. Tell us about your new movie, The Curse of Joe Robbie.
Oh man, The Curse of Joe Robbie. I'm a diehard Dolphin fan.
Welcome to the club.
Been there since, '84, I think. I remember I was probably 3 years old.
Yeah.
But I remember, having Dolphin gear as a child. And, as you grow older, getting, late 80s, the legend of Dan Marino. And, watching him struggle through the 90s, us almost getting there, having to deal with the Buffalo Bills. And then 2000s comes around and it's heartbreak. And then after 30-something years of heartbreak, I was like, what's going on here? There's got to be something going on here. And I remember my buddy had mentioned to me one day, he was like, hey, because he works for the city. Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah, you know that the stadium was built on an old Indian burial ground. I'm like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah. And I went on Google and I found an article from the Ocala Star from 1985. And in this article, it talked about an archaeologist named Bob Carr who was heading a state-mandated excavation of the grounds that Joe Robbie was going to be built on, and that they had found over 20,000 artifacts belonging to the Seminole Indians. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh shit, okay, well, I kind of think of myself as a Miami historian,
right?
And it's a storyteller, obviously. And I was like, there's a story here. Okay, well, let me do some digging. And I found Bob Carr's number, and I reached out to him, and I was like, hey, are you the archaeologist that led the excavation at Joe Robbie Stadium? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, hey, look, I'm a filmmaker. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I just want to hear from you what you found. And he gave me a great interview. And once I had that interview, I was like, okay, well, now let me go see how this history of the Miami Dolphins lines up. And it was painful because I started putting myself through that heartbreak that we had dealt with our entire existence. But then it just started hitting every single note. And I was like, oh my God. And I think the biggest one for me was first play in Miami Dolphins history at the Orange Bowl. A kid that graduated from Coral Gables High returns the kickoff for a touchdown. Right. First play in Dolphins history. They moved to Joe Robbie Stadium. Opening day against the Chicago Bears. It's a preseason game. Our first drive, Dan Marino gets injured. And I was like, this just wrote itself. Right. And once you start diving into it, if you're a Dolphin fan, you know all the stuff that we've done.
I know it, dude. I mean, Marino tearing the Achilles, the Pete Stoyanovich missed kick when we were up 21-0, the Natron Means game against Jacksonville.
The Jacksonville
the Chargers.
massacre.
Yeah, the massacre.
Ricky Williams.
We get Saban, and then he goes on to becoming the greatest college coach of all time.
Richie Incognito scandal.
Yeah.
It just goes, the list goes on and on. Draft pick after draft pick. Missing out on quarterbacks that could have been franchised.
Correct.
Drew Brees.
Drew Brees twice.
Things like that was just like, man, are we just bad as an organization? Or is there something bigger and stronger than us? And it turns out to be the curse. After making the film, I completely believe that we're dealing with something.
Okay, bigger. So walk me back. So I heard about this when I saw your clip. That's how we got in touch. Right. And but I don't know the whole story. And even when you go online, there's really not a whole lot about it. And I go, oh my God, this is there's something there. Yeah. What is it? It's a burial ground
All right, so I don't want to ruin this documentary for you guys, but basically, the Dolphins were the winningest team in all of sports from 1970 to 1985. Obviously we had perfect season, back-to-back Super Bowls, got back to AFC Championship, divisional championships, made it back to the Super Bowl, I believe, in '82. Following year, we draft Dan Marino. Dan Marino comes out blazing. It looks like we're going to be going to the Super Bowl for the next 15 years. In '85, the NFL tells Joe Robbie that they will no longer be considering the Orange Bowl as a host for the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. By this time, I believe the Orange Bowl had hosted 5 Super Bowls. And, Joe Robbie was a businessman. That's one thing you got to give him. The guy was, a visionary. And he said, if we can't host Super Bowls at the Orange Bowl, that's a revenue stream that I really enjoy. I got to go build another stadium. The county didn't want to support him, so he had to go do a privately funded stadium. And he found a lot of land on the outskirts of Dade County, and he purchased this lot of land. And right before they're about to break ground, an archaeologist came out and said, hey, this lot of land is actually part of Honey Hill. And Honey Hill is had a very significant role in the Seminole and Tequesta Indian tribes. They had found already some, human remains there, a lot of artifacts. And he said, before you guys break ground and build this stadium, we have to excavate and make sure that they're not, we're protecting sacred land. Turns out that they did the excavation and they found over 20,000 artifacts and bones belonging to the Seminole Indians. Of course, Joe Robbie had his sights set on a Super Bowl stadium. Yeah. And what a lot of folks don't know is that stadium wasn't built for the Dolphins. That stadium was built for Super Bowls and for a future baseball team.
Yep. That's why the sidelines are so wide early on.
From 1985, Joe Robbie was already trying to get a franchise in South Florida. Mm-hmm. And he built that stadium knowing that we were going to get a baseball team at some point and that it needed to house that baseball team. The Dolphins were doing great in the Orange Bowl. If anybody's ever been to the Orange Bowl, special place. It's incomparable when it comes to the energy and just the experience of watching a football game at the Orange Bowl, especially if you're in general admission and there's guys smoking blunts next to you and getting in fights, That's what the Orange Bowl was. And they built it, basically said, hey, we'll pay respect. We'll put like a little memorial over there in the corner somewhere.
Deal with it.
But, we got to finish this by 1987. And it didn't stop them. They went on and they built Joe Robbie. And from the moment, I'm a firm believer, you can see it. The moment we stepped into that stadium, things just didn't go well. Even his inauguration speech at the stadium was drowned out by helicopters.
Really?
From the moment that he stepped into that stadium, it all went bad. And he even dealt with a lot of, Joe Robbie passed away 3 years after the stadium was built. His family dealt with a lot of legal issues. They had like a $40 million tax. Yeah. They had to sell it. Yep. It just, the bad omens just kept lining up.
A lot of bad. What's funny, it's the Seminoles, but now the Miccosukee sponsor it.
No, it's actually Hard Rock. The Seminoles own the Hard Rock.
Oh, they own the Hard Rock.
Right. So that to me was, as a storyteller, that was the moment when I saw, okay, well, it's Seminole land. Yeah. There's the full circle, right? So
maybe Seminoles, the curse is off now.
Yes. I like to say the curse just wanted its recognition. Yeah. And we're winning the Super Bowl this year. God. But after last week's performance,
to the Seminole guys.
Yeah, after last week's performance, by the way, I don't know when we're releasing this, but last week was the 48-20 loss to the Buffalo Bills. It's just those moments where like, man, we feel like we have something, and then it's gut check.
Still in therapy because of all this. Marino, I mean, we had a great team when he tore his Achilles.
We had a great team.
We
had a great team throughout the 90s.
Throughout the 90s.
Great defense. Never had a running game, but we really didn't need one.
Because you had Marino.
Yeah.
What's funny is there's a wave of, I mean, the Dolphins have won one playoff game, I think, in 22 years. It could be off.
2008, I think, right?
Yeah. I don't remember.
It was the Lamar Thomas game.
The Lamar Thomas game.
No, not Lamar Thomas.
No. Lamar Smith.
Lamar Smith.
That guy. Yeah, he had that monster game against Houston.
Yeah.
I mean, the Oilers. Right. Anyways, and but there's a whole generation of people who think the Dolphins suck. Like if you're young, like when we grew up, we're coming off the hangover from the '70s. Then remember, we played the Redskins in the Super Bowl a year or two before we got Marino, and then we got Marino. But then you're like, we went to one fucking Super Bowl in all those years, like. How is that possible?
We went to the Super Bowl Marino's second year.
Second year, yeah.
Against the 49ers.
Yeah.
Lost to Joe Montana.
Yeah.
And it's funny, in the documentary, there's a commercial. It was a Pepsi commercial that was shot right after that Super Bowl where Montana and Marino are sharing a Coke. And Marino tells him, I'll get the next one. Mm-hmm. If he only knew that Montana would go on to have this illustrious career, and Marino would go on to be probably the greatest football player, NFL player, to never win a championship.
100%.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah,
You know, it's something that, Marino to us was a god as kids, right? Like we used to see him and be like, oh, we're good. Any given Sunday, because we got Dan Marino.
You're always in the game with him.
Always in the game.
He could always march you back. You're down 2 touchdowns, boom, boom, boom.
You know, we saw the fake spike against the Jets. You know, all the 4-quarter comebacks.
His comeback against the Patriots and Bledsoe on the opening day. I mean, the stories write themselves.
Yes. But then on the flip side, once I start making the documentary, it's like, damn. It was always like, it was a roller coaster. It was like, we're going to reach the highest peak that we can reach, and something's going to happen, and it's going to be a really hard fall from here.
Dude, so when you were talking to the Seminole leadership, and I can't wait to watch the doc. When you were dealing with the Seminole leadership, could they do a rain dance to lift the curse or anything? Because I lived in Chicago a long time. They had the curse. Boston, same crap. And they would bring out the goat, and they would do. Finally, now the good news is the Red Sox won, the Cubs won, the Dolphins. Is there anything that the Seminoles can do?
There's a curse lingering with the Detroit Lions, which is the curse of Bobby Lane.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're going to do with that because they've been probably worse.
They've been horrible.
Yeah. When I spoke to Everett Osceola, who's the Seminole cultural ambassador, who's interviewed in the documentary, I asked him. I was like, "Hey, is there a medicine man that I can reach out to? And I'll pay for it. You know, let's bring him out here." And there was a guy in Tampa who was involved in the medicine man space for the Seminole Indians, and he had done something, I believe, for the Tampa Bay Rays at some point. Okay. But he's elder now, and he's just not in the condition to come out here. And I told him, I was like, how do you feel about it? And, he said, look, that is sacred grounds for us.
Really?
Yeah. No, the Seminoles will tell you that is old sacred burial ground.
So when you call
that's not like for speculation.
Like
no. That in their history.
That's like our family blood was shed there. We buried people.
That's a fact. Joe Robbie Stadium is an Indian burial ground.
Wow. So
it's not rumored. That is a fact.
When you
go to the History of Miami Museum and they have the artifacts.
Right. Yeah. When you call them up, what do they say? Like they're like, like is another filmmaker or somebody calling about this story? It's actually true. Because, you can't find anything on the internet.
Well, I called him and I was like, hey, I'm doing this documentary about, I don't want to say the Curse of Joe Robbie. I told him, obviously, once we did the interview, I had to let him know what my intent was. But I told him, I'm like, hey, I'm doing this documentary about the excavation that happened in '85 at the stadium. I spoke to the archaeologist, Bob Carr. He gave me a lot of, eye-opening information. I would love to sit down with you and discuss this. And he's like, he's a younger dude. He must be probably like in his mid-40s, and he was like, well, I wasn't around at that time, but I've heard it from my elders, and we could definitely sit down and talk about it. And even then, there's parts of the interview that I was not allowed to put into the documentary because it's just their tradition. They don't want to
they don't want to expose it.
Exactly. So So
can the curse be lifted? That's a big question for me.
I like to say, and I got asked this at the
Because I'll be
film-
buried there.
I got I got asked this at the film festival. It was like, what was the purpose of you making this documentary? And I was like, well, first and foremost, I've been a Dolphin fan my whole life, and it's about time I get something out of this shit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all heartburn. I mean, it's terrible.
And then secondly, I'm a very spiritual dude, and sometimes, you just want recognition and respect.
Yeah.
And by me making this film, hopefully the curse or whatever powers,
mend some old wounds and just put it back
might just want that recognition. Might be like, yeah, you know what? This past 30-something years of shitty football, that was us. Now keep it. Now, we got the Hard Rock name there. Good luck. Mm-hmm. Now it's on you guys, So I'm hoping it got lifted with this documentary. We should see. We shall see. I think at the end of the day, we have a big game on Sunday.
Yeah, man. Do you think that this is our year?
Man, there's been so many years where I said this is our year. I thought Ricky was going to be our year.
Yeah, and then he retires.
Well, no. He got caught smoking weed.
Yeah, he got caught smoking
which
weed.
Now every NFL player smokes weed.
Right.
So it's kind of like, damn, dude, we really got caught for that. But there's just some things that, the way we got Don Shula. That was some Miami shit if I've ever seen it. Joe Robbie and Danny Thomas, who's a comedian from Hollywood, fly out to Hawaii. It just so happens they stay in the same hotel as Don Shula, and they wine and dine him, and illegally take him from Baltimore. And then we had to pay a fine.
We had to pay a fine, tampering, and we gave a draft pick.
We gave a draft pick, which who cares at that point?
Don Shula went to Super Bowls.
Exactly. And right off the rip, Don Shula comes, 1970, we're a winning team. Well, second season, we're in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, dude. I mean, we were good. Well, the other backstory is the Colts owner had bet big on the Colts, loses, and never forgave Shula for it. And it's a reason he hated Shula after that, and kind of let it happen that the Dolphins take it.
And there's a lot of things that are just coincidences, right? Yeah. Don Shula loses 2 Super Bowls. Where does he lose those 2 Super Bowls? At the Orange Bowl.
Good point.
Back to back.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why he was on the hot seat. Dan Marino getting drafted. Yeah. He comes in and he's gun blazing. And then to see him basically fall apart before our eyes. I remember those years from 1993 to I think it was 99, his retirement, where he was just he was a shell of himself.
Yeah, his last couple years with Jimmy were not
good.
Those
he looked like he had Pampers braces on his knees. He still had that arm, and that release.
But he couldn't move.
And I remember growing up, I was a huge Warren Moon and Randall Cunningham fan, and I was like, why can't our quarterback run? God damn it! So. There's a lot of things that once you see the documentary, they start popping up. I mean, the name changes that the stadium has gone through. I think it was 7.
Good point.
Right?
Yeah.
The carousel of head coaches that guys would come in for half a season, lose.
The dismantling of the Marlins. Yeah, we won there, but we also dismantled
the Marlins. That's something that we could talk about is that I don't mention in the documentary. Originally my first cut of the documentary was almost an hour and a half because I go into the Marlins and the Hurricanes.
Right.
And to me, there's a correlation between all of that, right? Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Joe Robbie builds the stadium for the Marlins. The Marlins get there in 93. The Dolphins now have to play on this hybrid field that's a baseball field and football field. Might lead to a couple injuries here and there, right? Yeah. And then 4 years into their expansion, the Marlins win a World Series at the stadium. As Miami sports fans, we're like, we're okay. That's good. The Dolphins could lose for a little bit more. We got a World Series ring.
Good point.
Fast forward 6 years later, 2003, we win another one against the mighty New York Yankees. I was living in New York at the time. I was like, oh my God, we won 2 championships. We seen 2 World Series championships from the Marlins. And then they decide to move to the Orange Bowl. And I grew up, if I'm a diehard Dolphin fan.
Hardcore Cane fan.
Oh, man.
I love the
Canes. Yeah. The Canes were my childhood, The first football game I ever went to was seeing Gino Torretta throwing it to Lamar Thomas, So I'm Canes through and through, even though it's dwindled through the years, unfortunately. But, you know, I was there when Dorsey beat FSU, Jeremy Shockey. You know, I was at those games. You know, those are huge memories in my sport event. You know, going whatever, and when they destroyed, or you know, I say destroyed when they basically bulldozed the Orange Bowl, and they built this beautiful stadium because Marlins Park is.
It's
amazing.
great. It's very state of the art. It's got it's great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful stadium. But to see attendance numbers, to see how bad the Marlins have been ever since that, and then on the flip side, to see how the Hurricanes went from probably the top three greatest football programs the NCAA has ever seen to where we are today. Yeah, man. You know, and I know we might have a decent year this year, but we're no longer the elite.
No, it's not
the
same.
You know, when we were kids, we were the elite. Yeah. You know, even when we got suspended and we had to deal like the Frank Costa years and stuff like that, you know. You know, we still knew it's just a matter of time before they lift the suspension and we're back. But now it's just like, man, we're not. It hurts. The Curse of Joe Robbie. I think it all comes together, you know, at the end of the day.
Where can people watch the movie?
Right now, we are deciding on how we're going to release it. Only in Date is also a producer on The Curse of Joe Robbie. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. You know, I want to see how the next couple games pans out before we go and tell everybody, by the way, you know. But it's funny. I watch these games, and it's like now after I did the documentary, I'm like, it's just a matter of time before it's activated, you know. And hopefully in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'll know more of when we're going to release the film. Hopefully it gets released as kind of like, hey, by the way, guys. By the way,
I don't know if you know about
this. Instead of like, some answers for you know why this is happening? Yeah. It's because of this, you know. But we'll see. I'll definitely keep you guys posted. All right, should be in the next few weeks.
Cool stuff, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Man, appreciate it, brother. Later.
This episode is brought to you by Buena Vista Creative, Miami's premier digital marketing agency. Visit buenavistacreative.com for more info on how Buena Vista can help your business increase revenue and create the brand and digital presence it deserves. Video and podcast production, web and app development, search engine and social media marketing, logo creation, outdoor, print, swag, and more. Visit buenavistacreative.com to learn more.